It always starts the same way. A trailer, a still frame, a face. A familiar Netflix title card fades in. The music hums with melancholy. A serial killer looks into the camera, and for a moment, he isn't a monster. He's a mystery. The story claims to be true, but the presentation feels cinematic. This isn't journalism. This is mythmaking. When Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story premiered, it was sold as a study into systemic failure, a critique of negligence and apathy. But online, it became something entirely different. Within days, TikTok and X were flooded with fan edits of Evan Peters as Dahmer, slow-motion shots, romantic soundtracks, captions like, "He didn't mean to." Halloween costumes appeared, fan pages multiplied, and the internet began to romanticize the aesthetic of atrocity. The man responsible for unthinkable violence had become reintroduced as a tragic character, a vessel for fascination, pity, even attraction. A killer rebranded as content. Then came Monster, the Menendez Brothers. It followed two wealthy young men who murdered their parents in Beverly Hills in 1989, a story already infamous from its televised trials. But this time, it was reframed for a new generation. The series leaned into tone, sleek visuals, emotional depth, a subtle air of rebellion. Social media quickly revived the brothers as misunderstood victims, symbols of trauma, masculinity, and generational pressure. Hashtags like "Justice for Eric and Lyle" spread across TikTok, mixing true crime discourse with fan cam edits and moody playlists. The brothers' story wasn't being analyzed, it was being stylized. And once again, empathy became entertainment. And then by 2025, Monster, the Ed Gein Story completed the cycle. Gein's crimes, the grave robberies, the skin masks, the furniture made from human remains had inspired decades of horror films, but Netflix refrained him too. The tone was elegant and almost spiritual. The visuals were haunting and beautiful. Critics praised the show's nuance, while viewers debated whether it was too sympathetic. But that's the new formula. Turn even the most grotesque figures into complex anti-heroes. The man who inspired Psycho was now a tragic study of loneliness, religion, and repression. Less monster and more misunderstood man. Together, these three shows reveal something about the moment we're living in. True crime has become prestige entertainment, a hybrid of horror, biography, and melodrama. The killers are cast like celebrities, their trauma polished, their motives given poetic weight. Netflix doesn't just tell these stories, it curates them. Each monster installment is another chapter in a growing anthology of rebranded darkness. The murder as misunderstood man, the horror reframed as human tragedy. But this fascination isn't new. It's just upgraded. In the 18th century, public hangings drew thousands of spectators. In Victorian England, women sent letters to death row inmates, promising eternal devotion. In the early 20th century, American newspapers glamorized gangsters as gentlemen bandits. Even medieval pilgrims once collected relics of executed saints, bones, teeth, blood, as if proximity to violence brought them closer to meaning. Humanity has always romanticized brutality when the storytelling is compelling enough. The only difference now is the medium. The guillotine has Wi-Fi, and the spectacle streams in 4K. This is what happens when empathy collides with entertainment, when real pain becomes narrative currency. The Monster anthology is not about evil men, it's about how we watch them. We no longer recoil, we analyze. We no longer mourn, we stream. Dahmer, the Menendez Brothers, Gein, all are reflections of our cultural impulse to make horror digestible, to render violence palatable by giving it cinematography and a score. And the result is eerily consistent. These stories don't represent evil anymore, they represent engagement. They're the perfect streaming subject, recognizable, controversial, emotionally complicated, and infinitely discussable. Each series spawns reaction videos, essays, Halloween costumes, and fandom debates. The victims fade into the background, the trauma becomes aesthetic texture. What remains is the show, the story, the brand, and the binge. Every generation has its favorite villain. Ours just happens to be a Netflix contract. And when the autoplay starts, the faces on the screen don't look like monsters anymore. They look like mirrors. The Monster anthology, beginning with Dahmer, moving through the Menendez Brothers, and culminating with Ed Gein, signals more than just Netflix true crime obsession. It represents a cultural evolution, the industrialization of infamy. Streaming platforms have transformed real killers into serialized intellectual property, each one another entry into a growing canon of marketable evil. The moral line between documentary and drama has blurred completely. These aren't history lessons, they're cinematic franchises. Each season follows the same formula: humanized just enough to intrigue, dramatized just enough to retain, and stylized enough to disguise. Audiences are offered empathy, not to redeem the subject, but to make the viewing experience emotionally satisfying. Horror becomes relatable. Atrocity becomes tragic. It's the perfect moral illusion. We can watch something horrific, feel compassion, and still call it critical storytelling. The violence is still there, but the shame is gone. That's the quiet genius of the monster model. It aligns perfectly with how digital audiences now process morality. Online, everything is consumed as fragments, clips, reactions, and emotional sound bites. Context collapses. Nuance disappears. What matters is how a story feels, and the Monster series feels cinematic, introspective, and artistic, just enough to distance the viewer from the real pain beneath it. It's horror disguised as humanity. This new storytelling structure mirrors influencer culture itself. Just as curators curate their flaws or relatability, these shows curate killer traumas for engagement. Each monster becomes a character study in alienation, loneliness, or control. Emotions universal enough to invite projection. Dahmer is the neglected outsider. The Menendez brothers are the oppressed sons. Gein is the isolated religious recluse. Their crimes are contextualized, even softened, by the intimacy of modern filmmaking. They aren't portrayed as predators. They're portrayed as tragic men who couldn't escape their own stories. And the audience rewards that approach because it feels emotionally complex, even when it's morally hollow. There's also a deeper psychological loop here. These stories let viewers flirt with darkness without a consequence. They offer the thrill of transgression and the safety of distance. Watching a dramatized killer isn't about condoning evil. It's about experiencing proximity to it. It's about exploring power, control, and chaos from the comfort of your couch. In that way, true crime today functions like religion once did. It externalizes evil, gives it a face, and invites us to watch its downfall as a ritual purification. But the real shift is what happens afterward. Dahmer, the Menendez brothers, and Gein have stopped being historical figures. They become symbols, shorthand for archetypes. Each one represents a different cultural fascination: repression, rebellion, isolation. Their identities dissolve into iconography, endlessly reinterpretable, endlessly profitable. The line between documentation and dramatization has vanished, leaving only myth. That's the paradox at the heart of the true crime boom. It claims to expose evil, but it ends up aestheticizing it. The camera lingers on the killer's sorrow, not the victim's suffering. The dialogue explores motive, not morality. And when the credits roll, the audience feels not horror, but catharsis. The viewer isn't haunted, they're satisfied. The story doesn't warn, it performs. In this new mythology, murder isn't an ending, it's a genre. Hello everyone, my name is Laura, and welcome to Dahlias in the Attic. Chapter 1, The Surface. Murder, but make it media. True crime has evolved into one of the most lucrative entertainment genres in the world. Not because audiences crave justice, but because they crave story. Podcast streaming, docuseries, and scripted dramatizations all promise awareness and social critique, but they're edited with the rhythm of thrillers and lit like a high-end perfume ad. The presentation is immaculate. Cool tones, ambient soundtracks, perfectly timed silence. Every killer gets a casting director. Every act of horror is reframed as a moment of cinematic beauty. In the process, real victims, real people fade quietly into the background, while audiences fall in love with the aesthetic of evil. This isn't accidental. Streaming services know how to design obsession. Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story, was constructed like a psychological slow burn, muted yellows, meticulous framing, and a haunting performance from Evan Peters that blurred the line between disgust and empathy. But on TikTok and X, that style became the point. Users began dissecting the show's wardrobe, analyzing the set design, and debating Dahmer's emotional motives like he was a complex anti-hero instead of a serial killer. Clips were edited with romantic filters, slowed down and layered with melancholy soundtracks. The internet didn't just watch Dahmer, it repackaged him. In the attention economy, horror becomes fashion. By the time Monster, the Menendez Brothers premiered, the formula had been perfected. The tone was glossy, contemporary, and emotionally accessible, almost designed to trend. Instead of fear, the show invited identification. The brothers weren't shown as cold-blooded killers, but as fragile sons, shaped by trauma and privilege, victims of the same wealth that defined them. Social media responded in kind, fan cam edits, playlists titled Menendez Core. Viewers debated whether they were justified, sympathetic, or simply broken. The conversation wasn't about morality. It was about relatability. When crime becomes content, empathy turns into aesthetic, and justice becomes a branding choice. Then, in 2025, Monster the Ed Gein Story gave the aesthetic its final, polished form. Gein Story, long associated with grotesque horror, was rendered as poetic tragedy. The show's color palette was almost painterly. Pale gray skies, candlelit interiors, slow shots of empty rooms. The pacing was elegant, the tone mournful. Reviewers called it beautiful and humanizing. Online, the word beautiful became the tell. Audiences weren't processing the horror, they were admiring the craft. The violence had been converted into texture. It was no longer something to condemn, but something to study, frame by frame, like an art film about grief. Across social media, the same visual language dominates. TikTok creators analyze killers' handwriting, outfits, and mannerisms the way literature students unpack character development. YouTube compilations use soft-focused transitions and melancholic soundtracks to retell murders as if they were tragic romances. Etsy shops sell mugs, t-shirts, and candles featuring mugshots or famous quotes from trials. Even courtroom footage, once the raw face of a tragedy, is turned into a meme template, a reaction format. Violence is now infinitely remixable, detached from the weight of what it means. The tone of modern true crime is no longer investigative, it's a curation. Every series, every podcast, every TikTok breakdown is designed to be watchable. The true crime industry has learned to package suffering in the language of streaming aesthetics. Dim light, textured sound design, carefully scored silence. Every confession is edited to sound cinematic. Every victim's name is spoken over strings. It's not just about the story, it's about the mood. Murder has become a genre of mood board. The new aesthetic of atrocity relies on a paradox. The viewer is both horrified and soothed, disturbed by what they see, but calmed by how beautifully it's presented. It's horror softened into ambience, tragedy wrapped in cinematic restraint. When Evan Peters stares blankly in Dahmer, when the Menendez brothers cry under the fluorescent light of a courtroom, when Ed Gein kneels in prayer in his dim farmhouse, those images are designed to feel profound. They transform human cruelty into visual poetry. But beauty in this context is a kind of anesthesia. The more stylized the horror, the less real it feels. Platforms like Netflix, Hulu, and TikTok all depend on this balance. The careful blend of shock and aesthetic pleasure. It keeps viewers scrolling, debating, and rewatching. It turns horror into comfort, death into dialogue, pain into performance. Even outrage becomes engagement, and engagement becomes currency. The more people critique the moral implications of these shows, the more visible they become. In this economy, morality is irrelevant, metrics are everything. And so we arrive at the strange surface of modern horror, where the camera moves like a brushstroke and the serial killer is filmed like a protagonist. True crime no longer asks, what happened? It asks, how does it look? The answer is always the same: polished, poignant, and profitable. We used to read about crime in black and white headlines. Now we watch them in 4K slow motion with color correction and sound design. We used to shudder and look away. Now we watch, we clip, we caption, and we share. In the digital age, murder isn't just documented, it's directed, and everyone is part of the production. Chapter 2, the mechanism, how the algorithm rewards empathy for evil. Every industry runs on a form of energy. For tech, it's data. For entertainment, it's emotion. True crime sits precisely at the intersection, a fusion of both. The more we feel, the more we click. The more we click, the more valuable our fear becomes. That's the real engine behind the modern true crime boom. It's not curiosity or even morbid fascination. It's the algorithm, the invisible system that learns what keeps us watching, and then feeds it back to us, darker and prettier each time. When Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story, first hit Netflix, it didn't just succeed because it was well made. It succeeded because it activated every emotional lever the algorithm recognizes as retention gold. Shock, pity, disgust, fascination, all balanced with visual restraint. The series was designed to provoke without repelling, to unsettle without alienating. Viewers could feel horrified and introspective at once, a moral safe zone where they could indulge curiosity without guilt. The platform noticed this. Completion rates soared. Recommended for you banners multiplied, and soon Netflix realized that it had found a new formula for engagement: empathy carefully packaged as horror. The following year, the Menendez Brothers monster expanded the formula. This time, the appeal wasn't monstrosity but relatability. The brothers weren't cast as killers so much as tragic protagonists, young, privileged, and broken. Their crime was presented through the lens of trauma, family dysfunction, and emotional repression. On TikTok, the discourse mirrored the algorithm's goals perfectly. Users dissected their testimonies, cried over courtroom clips, made fan edits of Lyle reading letters to his therapist. Sympathy became a social signal. People who once whispered about murder now discussed it in the language of empathy, healing, and therapy. What Netflix realized and what social media amplified is that horror doesn't need to terrify anymore. It just needs to resonate. By the time Monster the Ed Gein Story arrived, the model had matured into a complete emotional feedback loop. The show positioned Ed Gein not only as a historical figure, but as a psychological study. The tone was subdued, introspective, almost reverent. Instead of fear, the audience felt fascination. The show's slow pacing and minimalistic style were marketed as thoughtful, but the effect was deliberate, to slow the viewer's breath, to draw them closer, to create intimacy with the unimaginable. It was less about understanding Gein's crimes and more about understanding him. And in that subtle shift, horror evolved into empathy, and empathy into engagement. This is how the mechanism works. The algorithm doesn't understand morality, it understands attention. Every replay of a courtroom scene, every viral fan edit, every outraged tweet adds to the same data stream. Whether our viewer watches to condemn or to empathize doesn't matter. Both behaviors are identical in the system's eyes. The outraged tweet and the romanticized edit carry the same weight in terms of visibility. The moral difference is erased. Only engagement remains. The algorithm doesn't feed us what's right, it feeds us what performs. And that's why the true crime industry keeps reproducing itself. Once a particular blend of aesthetics and emotion works, sympathetic tone, tragic lighting, and complex villain, it becomes a template. Streaming services greenlight new projects that mirror the success metrics of the last. Dahmer leads to the Menendez Brothers, which leads to Ed Gein, which will likely lead to another monster next year. The titles may change, but the structure remains identical. Find a story that balances horror with humanity, outrage with empathy, and build it like a psychological mirror. Because what the algorithm has learned, and what we continue to teach it, is that audiences don't just want to watch horror, they want to feel morally complex while doing it. The moral complexity is key. It's what keeps us glued to the screen. When a story is purely evil, we look away. When it's purely sad, we lose interest. But when it's both, when it makes us question our empathy, our discomfort, our fascination, it becomes addictive. The streaming economy depends on that confusion. It thrives on being ambiguous because ambiguity demands discussion. Viewers tweet, they debate, and they analyze. They argue, and every conversation becomes more fuel for the next cycle. There's a psychological loop at work too. Humans are drawn to narratives that help us manage fear. We want to understand the unthinkable, to categorize it, to feel safe by naming it. But the modern entertainment industry has turned that impulse into a monetized ritual. The more we seek understanding, the more content it provides. The more empathy we show, the more the story expands. The line between moral curiosity and emotional consumption blurs until it vanishes entirely. Platforms like Netflix rely on this cycle. Their algorithms don't just recommend content, they learn from moral tension. If viewers pause during a graphic scene, skip to emotional dialogue, or replay a moment of confession, the system learns to empathize vulnerability over violence. That's why killers are filmed crying under cold light, why violins swell during interrogations, while even the most brutal characters are given moments of quiet introspection. The platforms have found the perfect emotional cocktail, horror softened by humanity, and once it's perfected, it can be endlessly replicated. This is also why true crime has migrated so naturally into the social media ecosystem. TikTok, YouTube, and X turn moral discomfort into micro-content. Every scene can be reinterpreted, every killer reframed, every story re-edited for sympathy or shock. The algorithm rewards both outrage and obsession equally, creating a culture where empathy and exploitation look almost identical. When a clip of a killer's monologue trends, the platform doesn't care whether people are condemning or admiring it, only that they're watching. The result is a chilling kind of emotional capitalism. We are all participants in it, whether we mean to be or not. Every like, every comment, every "can you believe this" share feeds the same mechanism that turns violence into entertainment. The moral distinction lies within us, but the platform cannot register it. To the system, it's all engagement, the same currency used to measure the success of a comedy special or a music video. In the end, this is the paradox of the modern true crime phenomena. We believe we are learning about darkness, but we are really training it. The algorithm grows smarter with every shiver of fascination, every moment of conflicted empathy. It learns how to hold our attention and never lets go. The machine doesn't care whether we're horrified or heartbroken, only that we're still watching. And we are. Chapter 3, The Echo, History's Mirror. What we're witnessing with Dahmer, the Menendez Brothers, and Ed Gein isn't new. It's simply the latest reincarnation of ancient instinct. Humanity's fascination with the spectacle of evil. We've always gathered to look. We've always found ways to make horror feel meaningful, to ritualize it, narrate it, aestheticize it. Platforms have changed, but the performance is the same. The algorithm is just the Colosseum rebuilt in pixels. In ancient Rome, thousands filled amphitheaters to watch executions and gladiator combat. Violence was theater and death was scripted into a spectacle. The crowds didn't attend out of bloodlust alone. They came for catharsis. To witness death publicly was to reaffirm moral order, to see chaos contained. The condemned were both villain and entertainment, reminders of what happens to those who broke the code. The emperor learned early that fear and fascination are two sides of the same coin. Keep people watching and they'll mistake it for justice. Centuries later, that instinct simply found new stages. In the 18th and 19th century Europe, public executions drew enormous crowds. Vendors sold snacks and pamphlets describing the condemned's crimes. Writers turned hangings into serialized stories. The French Revolution even made the guillotine a form of democratic theater, swift, equal, and efficient. People came to watch, to gasp, to feel the collective shiver of morality reinforced through death. There were even souvenir makers who sold sketches of the guillotine, portraits of criminals' moments before execution. It was content, live, visceral, and communal. By the Victorian era, murder had become literature. Penny Dreadfuls and the broadsides turned serial killers into household names. Jack the Ripper wasn't just a figure of terror, he was an icon, his identity endlessly speculated on by a public addicted to mystery. In America, newspapers treated outlaws like movie stars before movies existed. Billy the Kid, Jesse James, Bonnie and Clyde, all killers, all beloved. They were dangerous, glamorous, and doomed. Their crimes were horrifying, but their stories were irresistible. Society condemned them publicly and consumed them privately. That's the historical loop, repeating through every Netflix true crime hit. The monster anthology didn't invent the aesthetic of evil, it inherited it. The cinematic framing of Dahmer, the courtroom empathy of Menendez Brothers, the rural elegy of Ed Gein. Each one follows the same cultural pattern. Take something repulsive, frame it beautifully, and sell it back as reflection. The modern difference is scale. The internet doesn't need an execution square. It has the For You page. Instead of pamphlets, we have algorithms. Instead of moral outrage, we have engagement metrics. In earlier centuries, crowds gathered physically around punishment. Today, they gather digitally around narrative. The communal gas has been replaced with the collective click. We no longer cheer or jeer. We comment, react, and remix. The function is identical: to process fear by aestheticizing it, to reassert control by turning chaos into content. It's not that we're more voyeuristic now, we're simply more efficient at it. Even the language of modern crime echoes the rituals of the past. When streaming platforms advertise a show as a haunting look inside the human psyche, it's the same promise execution pamphlets once made. Watch and you'll understand why evil happens. When true crime podcasts dissect the psychology of the killer, they echo the 19th century fascination with the killer, the belief that evil could be read in bone structure. Every generation rebrands its superstition as science, its spectacle as education. The form evolves, but the desire remains the same, to witness transgressions safely. The danger, of course, is that distance breeds comfort. We believe that by aestheticizing horror, we're mastering it, that by turning killers into characters, we're making them less real. But history suggests the opposite. Every time a society romanticizes its monsters, it reveals its anxieties about itself. The Victorians adored stories of murder because they lived in a world obsessed with propriety. The Romans staged blood sport because it reflected the empire's obsession with dominance. And we, the digital generation, stream dramatized serial killers because we live in an age obsessed with visibility. The modern viewer isn't watching Dahmer or the Menendez Brothers just to understand them. They're watching to understand us. Our empathy, our outrage, our detachment. In the same way a Roman crowd measured its mortality against a gladiator's death, today's audience measures its humanity against dramatized killers. We post about accountability and trauma, but we binge the stories anyways. We condemn exploitation and still hit next episode. It's a ritual of reassurance that we're not them, that we're better, that we're watching for the right reasons. But like every ritual, the repetition wears away the meaning. What was once moral spectacle becomes aesthetic habit. Each new series must push further, feel deeper, look prettier. The more the culture claims to critique violence, the more it depends on it for attention. And that's the great echo across time. Societies that consume horror to feel moral and end up normalizing it instead. We like to think of progress as moral evolution, that we've moved beyond the blood-soaked amphitheater or the execution square. But maybe we've only changed our seats. The camera angle has replaced the gallows. The streaming queue has replaced the crowd. The guillotine has become a content pipeline, infinitely looping horror back to us, dressed in empathy, lit in cinematic grayscale. And when the final credits roll, when the screen fades to black and Netflix asks next episode, we don't look away, we click. Because just like the crowds that gathered centuries ago, we're not really here to witness justice. We're here for the feeling. Chapter 4, The Fallout, When Empathy Becomes Exploitation. Every story has a casualty. In the modern true crime industry, that casualty is empathy itself. It begins with good intentions, raising awareness, honoring the victims, telling the truth. But somewhere between the press release and the premiere, the moral clarity gets replaced with production design. The families who live through real violence become props in someone else's prestige drama. The dead are resurrected for ratings, and the line between storytelling and theft starts to blur. When Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story was released, the families of the victims said they were never consulted. They found out about the series the same way everyone else did, through trailers and X discourse. For them, it wasn't entertainment, it was reliving a nightmare. Rita Isbell, whose brother Errol Lindsay was one of Dahmer's victims, said watching her own emotional courtroom testimony recreated word for word by an actor was re-traumatizing. Netflix called it authentic. She called it cruel. That's the core paradox of this genre. To make a story real enough to move audiences, it must first strip away reality from the people who lived it. The same cycle is repeating for the Menendez Brothers. Before the series was even aired, online fandoms were already reframing the brothers as misunderstood victims, not of their parents' abuse, but of the public misjudgment. Hashtags like Justice for Eric and Lyle surged, transforming a brutal family tragedy into digital activism aesthetic. For some, the movement felt sincere. For others, it was performative empathy disguised as social consciousness. Either way, the result was the same. The boundaries between advocacy and entertainment dissolved. The brothers' stories became a form of cultural currency, proof that moral alignment could be displayed as easily as a like or a share. By the time the monster Ed Gein Story premiered, the tension between empathy and exploitation had become impossible to ignore. Critics praised his artistry. Families of victims criticized its existence. Gein's crimes had already inspired decades of horror films: Psycho, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Silence of the Lambs. But dramatizing his life again under the banner of true crime reignited the same question. How many times can we exhume the same story before it becomes desecration? Netflix marketed the show as an exploration of the human condition, but for those loved ones who were among the desecrated, it was just another reminder their grief was public property. This is the quiet cruelty of the true crime economy. The more empathy a story evokes, the more it can be monetized. The more real the pain, the more powerful the content. Every tearful interview, every blurred crime scene photo, every dramatized confession becomes part of a profit system that depends on the illusion of sensitivity. We call it empathy, but it's really extraction, emotional labor disguised as storytelling. For survivors and victims' families, the extraction has real consequences. They relive trauma every time the stories are revived. Their loved ones' names trend not because people are remembering them, but because people are binging their deaths. These strangers are analyzing their grief for entertainment, crying on TikTok, reacting on YouTube. Reviewing their pain is powerful television. It's grief without consent, tragedy without closure. Even for the audience, the fallout runs deep. When everything is aestheticized, when even murder is color graded, emotional fatigue sets in. People become desensitized to the horror not because they stop caring, but because they've been trained to consume pain passively. The emotional beats of a murder drama mirror those of a romance, comedy and thriller, shock, sympathy, release. Over time, tragedy becomes interchangeable with entertainment. The viewer cries, reflects, and clicks next episode. A full emotional cycle without consequence. It's catharsis on demand. Morality with a skip button. People being desensitized like this reshapes how we understand empathy itself. In the streaming age, empathy has become transactional. We perform it publicly. We rarely sustain it privately. We watch a dramatized killer cry and feel something, but we move on before that feeling asks us to act. The algorithm ensures it, serving us new content before discomfort turns into introspection. We scroll, we post, we sigh, we share. Our empathy becomes background noise, a soft hum beneath the feed. The psychological impact is subtle but corrosive. When horror is aestheticized often enough, it stops shocking us. When killers are humanized beautifully enough, they start to resemble us. That's the most dangerous transformation of all. Because once we see ourselves in them, we start forgiving their stories, or worse, glamorizing them. The boundary between curiosity and complicity dissolves, not because we approve of evil, but because we've learned to consume it comfortably. The fallout then is not just emotional, it's cultural. We live in a time when trauma is both marketable and measurable, where every tragedy can be turned into engagement. Streaming platforms and social media don't create evil, but they repackage it into something palatable, stylized, digestible, and endlessly reproducible. And as long as it performs, it will return. Dahmer, the Menendez Brothers, Gein, Bundy, the next one, then the next after that. Each new retelling promises reflection but delivers repetition. What dies in this process isn't innocence, it's sincerity, genuine empathy, the kind that leads to discomfort or accountability. Can't survive in a system built on endless consumption. It's replaced by its cinematic twin. Empathy as aesthetic, compassion as entertainment. It feels real enough to soothe the conscious, but shallow enough to never interfere with the scroll. And so we keep watching, the families keep grieving, the monsters keep trending, the stories keep looping, the screens fade to black, the music swells, and Netflix asks one final question. Soft, automatic, familiar. Next episode, Chapter 5, Reflection, the Human Mirror. In the end, every story we tell about monsters is really a story about ourselves. That's the quiet truth hiding behind every Dahmer edit, every Menendez Brothers TikTok, and every prestige trailer for the Ed Gein Story. The camera is never just pointed at them, it's pointed at us. At our hunger to understand evil, and our even deeper hunger to aestheticize it, and our need to keep looking even when we swear we've seen enough, because that's what the modern true crime boom really reveals. Not our fascination with killers, but our obsession with witnessing. Watching has become our ritual, our collective form of moral calibration. The Romans filled amphitheaters, we fill timelines. They measured their virtue through public spectacle. We measure ours through algorithmic empathy. The tools have changed, but the impulse hasn't. We seek meaning in the monstrous because it reassures us that morality still exists. The evil is out there, definable, containable, and bingeable. But the danger is that our pursuit to understand evil, we have begun to imitate its structure. The algorithm that feeds us these stories doesn't care about truth or empathy. It only mirrors our attention back to us. The more we share into it, the more it learns our preferences. It studies what we fear and what we pity, what we linger on. It tailors horror into comfort, cruelty into rhythm. And like a mirror that flatters rather than reflects, it shows us not the world as it is, but the version of morality we prefer to believe in, complicated, cinematic, and safe. The monster anthology is a perfect example of the cycle. Dahmer taught the algorithm that empathy sells. The Menendez Brothers taught it that relatability sells. Ed Gein taught it that introspection sells. Each season became a kind of experiment, a mirror held up to the audience's moral thresholds. Netflix didn't just stream stories, it studied its reactions. Every pause, every replay, every think piece became data. And from that data, a new cultural truth emerged. People don't just want to condemn evil, they want to feel close to it. The closeness is intoxicating. It gives the illusion of understanding. We tell ourselves we're watching to learn, to reflect, to stay aware. But awareness has turned into performance. We post about the tragedy. We dissect the psychology. We share quotes about empathy. We turn moral discomfort into proof of our humanity, as if feeling something absolves us of the act of consuming it. It's not empathy anymore, it's theater. The reflection becomes even clearer when we look at how we talk about these killers. He was lonely. He was broken. He wanted to be seen. Strip away the crimes and those sentences could describe almost anyone. That's the uncomfortable symmetry. The realization that what disturbs us about these stories is not their distance from us, but their proximity. In a world driven by visibility, where identity and validation are quantified by metrics, the line between the narcissism of the killer and the hunger of the audience grows thin. We both want to be remembered. We both want to be seen. Maybe that's why these shows resonate so deeply. They don't just dramatize murder. They dramatize attention. The killer becomes a metaphor for the algorithm itself, relentless unfeeling needing more to sustain itself. The audience becomes both victim and accomplice. We feed the machine with every click, and it rewards us with the same illusion of morality. It's a system built on reflection. The killer looks into the camera. The viewer looks back. And somewhere between those gazes, empathy collapses into engagement. And yet, buried in that collapse is the most human impulse of all, the desire to make sense of the chaos, the same instinct that made medieval pilgrims collect relics of the executed, that made Victorians write love letters to murderers, that makes us binge-watch serialized trauma. We keep retelling these stories because we're trying to understand something we can't name, our fear of meaninglessness. Violence shocks us not because it's cruel, but because it reveals how fragile our moral order really is. That's why every retelling feels both necessary and exploitative. Because deep down, we don't want the horror to end. We want it to teach us, to remind us of the boundary between good and evil, and to reassure us that we're still on the right side of it. But in a culture that sells morality as entertainment, that line keeps dissolving. The more beautifully we frame the monster, the harder it becomes to tell who's performing, the actor, the audience, or the system that profits from both. Maybe that's the true horror of our time. Not that evil exists. It always has. But that we've learned to admire its lighting, to slow it down post-production, to watch it in 4K. We no longer fear the darkness, we stream it. We've turned atrocity into ambience, violence into validation, and empathy into currency. And yet, even with that cynicism, there's a strange tenderness. The fact that we keep searching for meaning in the monsters means we haven't given up on understanding ourselves. Every time we ask why Dahmer, why the Menendez Brothers, why Gein, we're really asking what our fascination says about us, about what we've become and what we're becoming. Perhaps that's the lessons these stories were never meant to teach us, but inevitably do. That horror is cyclical, empathy is fragile, and history always finds new ways to rebrand itself. The guillotine becomes the algorithm, the crowd becomes a comment section, the executioner becomes the content creator. Every era believes it's different, but every generation believes it's enlightened. But the pattern endures, the names change, the platforms change. The hunger doesn't. We're still watching. We're still making myths out of these people, still mistaking spectacle for meaning. And somewhere in the dark reflection of the screen between the killer's face and our own, we see what we've always seen. Not monsters, just mirrors. So thanks so much for watching. I mean, this really came to air like when I was watching the Ed Gein. I mean, I watched the series. I did enjoy it. I'm not gonna lie. But I ended up almost feeling sorry for Ed Gein at the end. And like they idolized him and made him seem like he's some icon that transformed culture. I mean, I guess he did. His inspiration started all these horror genres, but yeah, I definitely like almost felt bad for him, and I'm like, that shouldn't be that way. I just don't want people to watch the show. Like, I feel like that Brian Koberger like was inspired by these killers and just wanted the media attention and wants a show made about him. I just don't want these people to think, oh, well, I'm a nobody, but maybe if I go on this horrible massacre inspired by another killer, a Netflix show will be made out of me and I'll become famous. So I don't know, it's a slippery slope. Let me know in the comments below. Did you watch any of these series? Did you like them? Anyways, thanks for watching.